Trump's endorsement again carries the day. Welcome to Columbus on the Record. Most thought the race was going to be close. It wasn't. It probably was decided the moment former President Trump endorsed Bernie Moreno for U.S. Senate. The Cleveland businessman and political outsider romped to victory in the Republican primary for U.S. Senate. Moreno captured 51% of the vote, 17% more than State Senator Matt Dolan, who was close in pre-election polls. Frank LaRose, who at one time led the race, finished a distant third. Moreno knew who to thank on election night.
I also want to thank President Trump. I just got off the phone with President Trump. And, you know, the reality is we have an opportunity now. We have an opportunity now to retire the old commie and send them to retirement home and then save this country.
Julie Carr Smythe, is it safe to say he would not have won this without the Trump endorsement?
I think that's fairly safe to say. I think that Matt Dolan was running a very expensive and aggressive campaign, and he distinguished himself in those debates with LaRose, who, as you said, was sort of coming in as the one person who had won statewide. He had done so convincingly twice. He was obviously has a high-profile job as the state elections chief. So both of them would have had a lot more of a chance until the Trump endorsement basically sorted out the field.
Terry, was it, I mean, what happened? We saw this surge. It looked like a surge from Matt Dolan. He led in one poll a week or so before the election, and he got whomped.
Well, part of it's a problem on polling, but I first want to quote Larry Sabato, the respected national analyst. His summary was, Moreno sizzles, Dolan fizzles. But on the polling problem, when media groups do polling with too small of a sample and they don't accurately get at who's really a likely voter, you're going to have problems. But there were shifts and trends in the last week, because when Chuck Schumer, the Democrat leader, spends $2.7 million in Ohio to back Moreno, and then you've got such a sewer system of ads back and forth and attacking everybody, things got a little wild and crazy there in that last week.
Yeah, Derek, Moreno had to have thought it was going to be close because they got Trump in here just 2 days before the election for that rally in Dayton.
Yeah, the rally definitely helped Moreno. There's no question about it. I mean, there were polls that showed that all three candidates were running relatively close, you know, a few days up until the election. But Moreno, you know, outperformed in Northeast Ohio. That's his home base. He did very well in Southwest Ohio, which is a relatively conservative part of the state. And he did well in the major metros, too. He did well in Cleveland, Columbus, and Cincinnati areas.
Yeah, he won all 88 counties, Darrell. I mean,
that was stunning. The fact that he won a majority of the votes in a three-way race was very significant. Derek, I think broke it down really well. First of all, how do you game plan this? What is a likely voter when the presidential race is off the board? You have a three-way race. Who knows what turnout's going to be and all that? That's a deadly game. I wonder how many of Bernie Moreno's votes were Democrats crossing over, especially because he did perform so well in the major urban areas. I looked at those totals and I went over to the I-75 corridor, you know, as red as counties as you get. He didn't win by as much. Dolan actually did better over there. We may never know, and I may be totally all wet, but it makes me wonder how to explain that dynamic.
Interesting.
Yes, and as Terry mentioned, there had been a lot of Democratic money come in at the end, trying to entice Democrats to cross over. I know I talked to at least one person on that day who said they were crossing over. I think they were crossing over to vote for Dolan out of not wanting Bernie Moreno to win, but I think crossover votes could have been huge. I believe the Democratic turnout in the primary was only about half of what the Republican was. So who knows
There are no real
what
contests
the
on the Democratic,
motivators
yeah.
were.
Right, and of the turnout, it's very important when you look at the 3 counties that had the lowest turnout in the state. It was Hamilton, Franklin, and Lucas. Those 3 plus Cuyahoga is part of what the Democrats have to do to get their base excited. But you look at the turnout differences, there's really a question of who's excited, who's not excited, and where does it impact things in the fall.
Yeah, but they're, on the Democratic side, I mean, Biden was the nominee. Brown didn't have an opposition. There were,
I understand, but still, there are lots of signs of who's excited in the voter base, who's going to turn out, and that's something everybody's got to worry about because not all voters turn out equally.
There was an endorsement late. Darrell, Mike DeWine endorsed Matt Dolan really late. He said he wasn't going to endorse. Then he did, and Dolan did not do well. Did that endorsement hurt Matt Dolan, do you think, among Republicans who like Donald Trump or who don't like Mike DeWine?
I don't know. I mean, aside from someone like Trump, I'm not even sure how much these endorsements really matter. I mean, you had Rob Portman right before, the governor, of course. I don't know. It was like, to me, that does show that, the insiders were seeing that the polls were close as well. And for whatever reason, Governor DeWine was persuaded, hey, maybe you could make the difference here in this close race.
Yeah.
And I'd raise the question of those endorsements from the governor and the former senator came out, but did they come out too late and did they use them? Because yes, it was announced and we talked about it, but did it really get on the TV screens? Did it get in the mailboxes? Did people know the reasons why those endorsements were coming out? So I'd argue they weren't utilized very well.
Yeah, I thought the endorsements were relatively ineffective because of how late they came out. When you think about the Republican Party, I mean, the Republican Party is not the Republican Party that everybody around this table knows. This is a party that is really controlled by former President Trump. And so when Trump made his endorsement and when he came a few days before the primary election, that really sealed the deal for Bernie Moreno.
And Bernie Moreno, every ad had Donald Trump. Every debate answer had Donald Trump's endorsement. He was very on message, and that was the key, I guess. Moreno was the candidate Democrats wanted to face Sherrod Brown. Allies of Senate Majority Leader Chuck Schumer spent $2 million on pre-primary ads to boost Moreno. That probably did not matter, but Sherrod Brown seems to be ready to make his case.
Bernie Moreno always looks out for himself. I mean, he has said in this campaign that he won't work with Democrats. He just is going to go to Washington and do his own thing. He's illustrated that by, again, calling for a national abortion ban with no exceptions, even though Ohio overwhelmingly last November voted by 13 points for constitutional amendment on abortion rights. And the arrogance of he doesn't really care what the voters want. That's really who he is, and we will make that contrast.
Now, Moreno has changed his position. He now favors a national standard for abortion at 15 weeks. But, Darrell, this will be quite the contrast, and this will be Sherrod Brown's toughest race since he first won in 2006.
Well, I think you're right. I think that's totally clear. I harken back to 1981 when I had the pleasure of being in Pomeroy, Gallipolis, or Gallipolis, if you please. Areas of that scenic wonder in November with Sherrod Brown. It was his first trip on a statewide campaign. He successfully won Secretary of State. And I've seen his campaigns from the inside, and do not underestimate his ability, one, to raise money, and two, to do that retail campaigning. He knows people in the crowd. He will call out names. And he knows how to, how should we say, service his constituents. The folks right here at Ohio State, he's gotten beaucoup bucks for this university. People like the Society of CPAs, who's that? Well, it's a good interest group. They back him because I talked to one of them. They said, we told him what we wanted. He gave it to us. But yet the margin of victory every cycle has gone down for him. It's like 6 points last time to Jim Renacci. And the fact is, Trump is almost positively going to carry Ohio, and he could make that 8-point victory margin, look really small. Sherrod Brown has to win Donald Trump voters over to his side. How is he going to do that?
Why did Democrats seem to want Moreno over Dolan and Frank LaRose?
Well, I mean, Dolan was more of the traditional establishment candidate when you looked at the three. I mean, you look at Bernie Moreno; he's a businessman. He's never been on the ballot before, and Dolan has been on the ballot before. He's very well respected amongst his Republican colleagues, and he's held that seat for a while. So he did not. He would have ran a campaign that would be similar to one that would be equally would balance on the Democratic side, if you will.
Well, and when I interviewed Dolan there toward the end, he said, you know, his argument was basically my position on abortion, which is going to be one of the largest issues this year. He said, I have a position that I believe is more in line with what Ohioans want, which is he's always been for 3 exceptions. He voted against the heartbeat bill. These are things, you know, the Democrats wanted to run against the person they thought was the most extreme, who believes this 2020 election was stolen, who believes that in abortion without exceptions, as Sherrod said there, and as you pointed out, isn't exactly accurate. But, you know, I mean, that's what they're looking for.
It's a late change. He was for no exceptions on abortion as late as 2022, Terry. Will that come? That'll be a big issue, but the economy also will be a big issue in this campaign.
I would argue the economy is the #1 issue, and Brown has 3 problems. One is Biden. How does he escape the dragon? To quote the New York Times today, they basically said it's over in Ohio. Trump's going to win Ohio. And how does he defy the gravity in order, Brown, to make up for what a drag Biden's going to be? The other 2 big problems are grocery stores and gas stations, because people go there every week, and all the preaching out of D.C. and by Biden that the economy's wonderful and that there's no problems with inflation, nobody believes that because it's not true when you go to the grocery store and you go to the gas station.
Well, the unemployment rate is at 3.7, and the stock market's at record highs, so the numbers are.
But for real people who are not in the stock market and not hedge fund people, they're at the grocery store, they're at the gas station. That's what they feel.
I wouldn't underestimate Senator Brown, though. I mean, he's been a champion of the people forever. He's known for his stance on dignity of work. And at the end of the day, you know, as our economy grows, people are going to be looking to someone that's actually going to be fighting for them in Washington, and that's not going to be Bernie Moreno.
All right.
But this is the first time since 1990, when he lost to Bob Taft for Secretary of State, that Brown will be on the ballot when there's not the top of the ticket that's either neutral or helping him. So he's got potentially a real negative drag at the top of the ticket. That's part of the turnout problem for Democrats.
Does it go with the Tim Ryan method, do you think? Fully embrace the Trump Democrat? He can't really, because he's got a longer record than Tim Ryan had.
There are interesting, and both men would probably kill me to hear this, but there is an interesting overlap, particularly here in Ohio, on trade issues and on populism. Now, again, I talked to Sherrod Brown more than I talked to Donald Trump, as in 100% to 0%. Yeah. Not by choice, his choice. You know, he hates it when you say that, because, you know, Donald Trump's a fake populist who lives in a gold palace, yada, yada. But that, you know, this wave we first started hearing in 2016 of crossover country over the Mahoning Valley, you know, that's just perpetuated, I think.
Yeah. We'll see. The division between the House Republicans at the State House was on display in Tuesday's primary. Speaker Jason Stephens had a slate of candidates he supported. His Republican rivals had their own slate. As it turns out, 4 state reps who supported Stephens for Speaker lost their primaries. While it may squeeze his margin, it looks like Stephens still has the support he would need to hold on to the Speaker's gavel. Terry, is that the case? Do you think, does he, based on the primary results, Stephens stays?
You could argue there's an advantage that way, but really it's going to depend on a number of key races, because the Republican majority in the Ohio House will probably shrink down a little bit, so there might only be 62 to 64 seats there. Then there's the question who wins, who doesn't win, and then there's always the wild card that in reality a lot of the Democrats don't like Matt Huffman. Will they try and tip the balance? So there's a number of different factors, but kind of like in baseball or pro football, a player to be named lately, this is an issue to be determined later.
Yeah. 4 people lost their seats because they voted for Jason Stephens.
Right, and these are Republicans who voted for a Republican speaker. They were censured by their own party for doing so, for cooperating with Democrats. It's a no-no in that party. in many people's minds to cooperate with another party anymore. You're supposed to hold the line. And we've seen it in polls, and voters believe that as well. They say, I like a person, I like to send a person in that's going to hold on to their values.
So that could affect the next speaker race if, you know, if you're a Republican on the fence, maybe you like Jason Stevens, but if the party says Matt Huffman's your guy, you know.
Matt Huffman is certainly a much more formidable figure than Derek Barron was, you know, about, well, a year and a half ago. He has been very powerful, and he pulls out all the stops, both visible and behind the scenes. It will be very interesting. But as Terry said, you know, you have some fall races, and who knows how those go? You know, and you know, these are new maps and all that stuff.
So what do Democrats do, Derek?
They're going to vote with Speaker Stevens. That's what's going to happen. I mean, if it's a matchup between Speaker Stevens and Matt Huffman, Democrats are going to vote with Speaker Stevens all day long for the speakership. I just don't see any other way around that. So, you know, in all of this scenario, the only people that lose in all of this is actually the people of the state of Ohio, because all of this infighting on the Republican side has resulted in less than 20 bills being passed for the whole, for the entire General Assembly. So it's really a problem that needs to be fixed and fixed fast.
All right. It has gotten little attention, but nearly half of the Ohio Supreme Court is on the ballot this fall. Lisa Forbes won her primary this week, and the Democrat will face Dan Hawkins. Incumbent Michael Donnelly faces Republican challenger Megan Shanahan, and Democrat Melody Stewart takes on Republican Joe Deters, who was appointed to the court when Sharon Kennedy moved up to the Chief Justice's seat. Derek, Clay, these are pretty important races for Democrats. Do they have a good chance of capturing some of these seats, at least two of these, to get a majority?
I would say that they have a relatively good chance of capturing, you know, a couple of the seats. The issue is when they started putting party tags on these judicial seats, then, you know, a lot of people are not, they're voting party line. And justice is supposed to be blind. This is supposed to be the one branch of government that, you know, you vote for people based on your own personal feelings. There really shouldn't be party tags on any type of judicial seat, but now we have them, so it's gonna give the Republicans an advantage.
Is it the coattails, Terry, will carry these three Republican candidates?
Well,
in?
it all gets back to the tide. If Biden can do something magically and people believe the economy's all wonderful, maybe the Democrats will have more of a chance. But if they ignore Ohio and Biden is still struggling nationally or internationally, then it's going to be tough for the Democrats to make up the difference.
The Democrats will try again, as we talked about in the previous race. You know, they'll try to make it about abortion. In this case, it's quite tactilely about abortion because we have this constitutional amendment. We've seen at least some Republicans at the State House try to even pass a bill that would limit the court's ability to interpret that amendment. That bill did not go anywhere, but which implies the court does have some sway over that. And we have many abortion laws on the books that have to be sorted out. We also have a redistricting issue that'll be on the ballot, which I think is going to raise interest in the Supreme Court race in ways that it usually is not.
Do the Democrats run as a slate? Because we do have the party labels now, they could run ads and say, vote Democrats on the state Supreme Court. You don't have to list each name.
It's an interesting strategy question. I would say yes. I mean, you might as well embrace this. Republicans made this change because right now the Republicans are in the Senate in Ohio. They not only allowed party labels, they moved it up the ballot. So the coattails effect that Terry talked about can be more pronounced. You know, that used to be way down at the ballot and no parties. Now they have both.
Is a slate the way to go, Derek? And how did they break through? Because we have a Senate race. We probably won't be a whole lot of presidential ads on. We got the possibly two ballot issues. How do they break through?
I think anytime you can run as a unit is good, right? You know, the Senate race is going to draw people out to the polls. You know, of course, this is a presidential year, So I think anytime you can try to run as a slate, it's a good thing.
So if they wrote an ad, Terry, that says, protect reproductive rights, vote Democrat for the Supreme Court, how do Republicans counter that?
Well, part of the problem is the abortion issue still is hot and big an issue because some of the recent polling showed that it slid down because Ohioans voted not once but twice basically to say we want those rights to be there. So is that issue still that relevant in November to a large number of people? And running as a slate, the problem is when you go on TV in Cleveland, yes, you're trying to speak to Cuyahoga County, a Democrat base, but it goes out to a lot of rural and swing county areas. So you do it as a base. And remember, 2 of these 3 seats are now occupied by Democrats. If you run as a slate and it backfires on you, you could be 0 for 3.
It'll be interesting to watch. All signs point to a historical election for a Franklin County prosecutor. Barring an upset, the county will elect its first woman prosecutor and first black prosecutor. Columbus City Council member Shayla Favor won a 3-way Democratic primary and will face Republican John Rutan in the fall. Derek Clay, what was the key for Shayla Favor? Was it name ID? She's on City Council.
Sure. Well, you know, Councilwoman Favor has been on the ballot for a little while. She was the top vote getter in the last council election. So with the new configuration of City Council, everybody runs citywide. Yep. So she was the top vote getter. She's been in the community. She's lived in this community for a while. Her opponent was not born here. He I believe was from Indiana and not very well known in the community. And even though he worked in the prosecutor's office and from everything that I've told, done a pretty good job in the prosecutor's office, he just wasn't that well known.
But Terry, let me ask you this. John Rutan, he is a local defense attorney. He says the local election was stolen in 2020. He says 9/11 was an inside job and Donald Trump is a Trojan horse for the Democratic Party. Is this the best Republicans can do in Franklin County?
Well, those statements are stupid and he really shouldn't be on the ballot. You disqualify yourself. But the reality is Sheila Favor is never prosecuted or lost a criminal case because she's never been there in doing felonies. And this office now, after 4 years of an absentee, missing in action Gary Tyack, is in a shambles. So how do we get this office fixed so that convictions can be done? Because there's been a lot of high-profile losses through the prosecutor's office. It needs fixed, and it's hard to have a first-time person learning on the job doing that.
She does come in as, at a time when female black prosecutors are on the rise. Obviously, we're seeing them in some of these Trump cases and so forth. And it is often the case that the background that they have is not the traditional rise up the ranks because those positions have not been available to them as I was studying up on this issue this week. So, it is a fair argument what her background is, but it's also been sort of not uncommon around the country.
Daryl?
I was struck when I talked to her the day after she won of a couple of things, and perhaps the biggest one was that she's not going near a death penalty case. She's not even going to try. Now, not that Franklin County's had a whole lot of them in many recent years, but she says she believes the system is still unfair and disproportionately hurt some minorities, the lower economic spectrum, if you will. So she doesn't even want to go for that. She's also going to leave in place basically you get an automatic special prosecutor whenever there are allegations against local police, where there's use of force, use of deadly force, things of that nature.
This will be a different perspective, a woman and an African-American in this post.
Yes, will be a different perspective, but I've worked with Councilwoman Favor on a number of different issues for various different clients. I know her to be tough, but I also know her to be fair. And you will see a lot of reforms coming out of this office, even though she's not prosecuted a case. That doesn't mean that she doesn't have the ability to go into that office and give that office what it needs to be successful.
Well, and we can't forget either that down at the State House, they have significantly weakened this position. I mean, when we had Ron O'Brien for so many years, and he was, the place you had to go to prosecute state-related government crimes, and it's not the case anymore.
All right, let's get to our final off-the-record parting shots. Dirk Clay, up first.
Yes, so Intel got a shot in the arm this week. I believe it was $2 billion that's going to be coming towards Intel and chip making facilities, and I think Central Ohio is going to get about $28 billion of that.
All right. Terry.
Earlier this month, I got back from around the world in 31 days, personal travel, including a great deal in India, Singapore, Japan. And I got to tell you, politicians on both sides in America need to wake up because the rest of the world is catching up. And in some cases, they're exceeding what we're doing. And we just can't keep doing the same old that we've been doing in the past.
All right. Julie.
Well, I mean, I'm taking a much needed little break from that after that primary. It was a really intense one, but I think that we have to brace for another year of incredible spending and campaigning in the Senate race this fall.
Interesting.
I'm going back to a guy I haven't mentioned in years here. It's been 15 years right now that a young Upper Arlington rower named Blake Haxton was struggling for his life up at Ohio State. He is now gets around in his wheelchair all over the place, travels as an attorney, flies internationally. An incredible miracle still goes on.
That's a great story. Thanks for that update. My off-the-record comment is keep an eye on Jon Husted. I predict that he will be a full-throated supporter of President Donald Trump in this coming campaign as he starts to lay the groundwork for a possible run for governor in 2026, right? Is that what it is? Can't keep him straight. Anyway, he's kind of been muted in support, not muted anymore. That is Columbus on the Record for this week. Continue the conversation on Facebook. You can watch us anytime at our website, WOSU.org, also on YouTube and the PBS video app. For our crew and for our panel, I'm Mike Thompson. Have a good week.